What's up, y'all? TBrown31 here with JaboctheGreat. Once again, we are back with another episode of the Last Word podcast. So today starts the most important month of football. We got the college football semifinals later on this afternoon. We had a huge weekend in the NFL, another huge weekend coming up last week of the season. But we're going to start with some games from this past weekend. Detroit and the Dallas Cowboys. This was a big one in the NFC. Literally determined a whole lot of crap just in playoff seeding. We'll get to that in another video. But the big story coming out of this one, obviously the controversial ending at the end with I still don't understand what exactly is going on with this play. I'm not going to lie to you. You had a whole legal formation, ineligible. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on. They had so many different referees trying to explain this, coming out from the NFL and rules experts, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, the Cowboys end up with a 20-19 victory over the Lions. And with an Eagles loss to the Cardinals, they catapult up to the number 2 seed in the NFC.
Yeah, a big result here for the Cowboys getting their own victory, and then of course later on in the week here getting that victory from the Cardinals over the Eagles is ends up being a massive New Year's Eve weekend for the Cowboys. So we'll look at this game on paper. It's a good game for both teams. We won't be able to ignore the ending of the game. But before we get there, Dak went 26 for 38, 345 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. A pretty solid game from Dak Prescott. Tony Pollard led the run game with 49 yards, but not much else happened. Dallas played this game through the air. CeeDee Lamb was the leader of that air game with 227 yards and a touchdown. That touchdown being a 92-yard touchdown grab. Pretty good pass from Dak, and then a lot of yards after the catch from CD, but I'd say it's about 50-50 on yards in the air versus yards after the catch on that one. So just a good play from Dallas's 2 best players at this moment. Or 2 of their best players. You could maybe make some other arguments, but I'm going to say that Dallas's 2 best players. Brandon Cooks also got in on the fun, got 60 yards total, and got himself a touchdown. So CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks just kind of dominated this game as much as you can dominate a 20-19 game. CeeDee Lamb did lose a fumble at the goal line, and then Terrence Steele recovered a Dak Prescott fumble to save them from getting a turnover there. And Jordan Lewis and Donovan Wilson would pick off Jared Goff. Speaking of that, Goff goes 19 for 34, 271 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Not the best game for him. David Montgomery put the team on his back, got 65 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs also picked up 43 on the ground. The Lions run game has been a pretty good 1-2 punch this year. They kept that up in this game. Amon-Ra St. Brown led the air attack with 90 yards. They got himself a touchdown as well. Sam Laporta and Jameson Williams also had pretty good days in the air. They've been pretty good this season. Laporta got 84 yards. Williams got 69. Good days for them. And then Ifeatu Melifonwu picked off Dak Prescott. So they did end up getting that 1 turnover. But, of course, the story of this game, as Terrence said, this is a good dogfight. It's a 20-19 game. It's 7-3 after the first quarter. It's 7-3 at halftime. That would flip a little bit as we entered the fourth quarter with the Lions scoring a touchdown in the third and Dallas only getting a field goal. Then Dallas would put up 10 points in the fourth, and Detroit would put up 9. They could have put up 10. They could have went for an extra point. But they did successfully convert a 2-point conversion on a little trick play. But the refs said that there was an ineligible receiver, even though Taylor Decker went up and declared himself eligible. They called number 70, who is not Taylor Decker, as the eligible receiver, which was apparently not correct. Dan Campbell even sent them a warning ahead of the game, like, hey, if we get in this kind of scenario, I'm going to use Taylor Decker as in this little trick play scenario. So I'm not really sure how the refs got too confused on that. I will also say, though, that they said they sent I was watching some analyst stuff yesterday, and they were saying how, Dan Campbell sent multiple O-linemen to the refs so that the Cowboys defense would be confused on which one of them was the eligible receiver. But it's also, I saw on that same show, that it's like the refs' responsibility, of course, to tell the defense who's eligible so they can cover them. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of that would be, to try to trick them when they have to tell them who's eligible anyway. This whole thing is kind of confusing. At the end of the day, you can hear the audio, you can see everything. I believe that Taylor Decker was reported eligible. I do think the Lions end up getting robbed here. They played a good game. Of course, Dan Campbell went for 2 points multiple times because of these things. He could have kicked an extra point and forced overtime. At this point for the Lions, as they're locked up on the division spot, I mean, I guess Dan Campbell's treating it as a playoff game energy and just wanted to go off with a win. You don't want to force overtime. Don't want to have your guys out there any longer than they need to be. So, I mean, I get it. I think that this game could have been salvaged. Maybe we force overtime and they do win. But at the end of the day, I do think that this is one of the more unfortunate calls of the season because this one does directly impact the loss. Now, of course, they went for 2 again and missed. So that's an issue. But it's a weird ending to a pretty good game between 2 top-tier teams. I mean, it sucks that it comes down to this at the end because it's just a good game overall. So I do want to say that both these teams played good football. The Cowboys defense maybe got bailed out here at the end and then was able to bring it back and stop the next attempt at it. So interesting game, weird tomfoolery from the referees. This referee team has been quote-unquote downgraded. They will not be reffing any playoff games. So, we've seen the NFL do that punishment before where they bring down the hammer of justice and say you can't ref a playoff game, which I guess is helpful. You don't want a referee crew that made a mistake like this in a playoff game, but there's probably other things we could do that would be a little more impactful. I don't know. I'm sure missing out on reffing a playoff game hurts their paycheck, but weird ending. Weird scenario with the sending multiple O linemen to confuse them, even though the refs are supposed to report who's eligible anyway. Because I mean, you can't just straight up lie to the defense and be like, which one of these guys is eligible? And that's just kind of unfair. So I'm not exactly sure of all of the little details that happened in there. But at the end of the day, the Lions come up short, lose 20-19. They hold on to the division title anyway. That was already locked up. At worst, they'll finish as the 3 seed. At best, they'll finish as the 2 seed. There's not a whole lot to be too mad at for the Lions here. I mean, this wasn't like a season-ending loss. And for Dallas, it was a massive victory.
They obviously, the Niners, they lock up the number 1 seed yesterday, but Detroit still would have had a chance, just off of this game had they won. With that, didn't have that opportunity. And more likely than not, they're probably not going to get the 2 seed now. It's more likely that they'll get the 3 seed because Dallas just has to win, or the Eagles just have to win and have Dallas lose to get the 2 seed. So, in that sense, it is frustrating because we haven't seen a single 7 seed beat a 2 seed yet. And I don't think it's going to happen in the NFC or AFC this year. So, in essence, you don't get a bye like you used to, but you still get much easier competition in the wild card round, and then you get a second home game, obviously, alongside the number 1 team. So instead of getting 2 home games, possibly they only get 1 guaranteed now by winning their division, of course. With that being said, I don't really like the fact that the NFL, and whoever else, ESPN, NFL, was sitting here trying to bring out people to try to explain some nonsense. And I think the first time I really and maybe probably most people really were like, okay, wait a minute, was when they had Joe Buck trying to explain what, the rest were thinking here and what they're trying to say. And as you can see, you can literally see Penei Sewell, you can see Decker at the ref, speaking to the ref, and then you see Skipper coming up after the fact as the ref is about to start going away. And as he's saying that, he's like, oh, they're saying 68 didn't report and 70 did. And I'm like, how though? Because they're not even as he's saying that, they're showing them coming, showing 70 coming up, and then showing Penei and Decker running away, after they talked to him. So I was just like, I think the best explanation is that they made a mistake, and the NFL obviously now they, like I said, they downgraded them, which is something I ain't never heard them say that. We've rarely seen reprimands for officiating crews. It just doesn't really happen. And you can kind of go back to the replacement ref season, back in 2012, I think. There was a lot of issues with that. So quality of the referees obviously has been an issue for a long time. The fact that they even had to go to replacement refs because they couldn't get the referees union to come to an agreement when they're not even full-time refs in the first place. I mean, that's an issue in of itself there. So I think absolutely they dropped the ball. They screwed that one up. I think after, not too far after that, the next morning, Adam Schefter, he came out with a post on Twitter saying, hey, there was also this tripping penalty that was sort of going the other way, and then people were saying, oh, there should have been a penalty on that CeeDee Lamb touchdown. It's like, I guess we can just do this all day. But in regards to that specific play, it was very obviously a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear on that one. There's definitely no way you can say that it was a mistake. I mean, we've seen the play. I agree with you. I don't think we should go and look at every play of the game and say, well, could have been a penalty here. There could have been a penalty here, because we can do that probably every play. You can probably try to nitpick everything and find somebody who might have jumped the line. They had a little too much contact or anything like that. It's not fun. This is not like a nitpicky penalty that we're trying to say cost the Lions a game. This was like clearly, Sewell and Decker are there. Decker reports as eligible. Skipper just like walks up towards the end, and then they say it was him. It makes zero sense. There's no logical path. I don't understand what Joe Buck was doing with trying to be like, let's see what the refs are thinking. I would love to hear that from the ref themselves, because there's no way that I can see that Decker is not the one that's eligible. If they had called it on Sewell, like he was the eligible guy, at least I would be like, well, they were both there. It's still wrong, but especially with the knowledge that Dan Campbell kind of sends a warning pre-game, to be like, hey, if I want to do this trick play, I'm going to use Taylor Decker. And then they use the trick play and use Taylor Decker. I just don't really get it. It doesn't make sense. It's an interesting one. Dallas has had a season that's been riddled by penalties, and they've had a few games cost them on their own penalties. But this one is a rough one for them to come out of a victory with major help on the penalties to the Lions. Both of them 11-5 now. Dallas ends up being 8-0 at home. The Lions put up probably the biggest fight they've had all season at their own stadium. So it's just a crazy scenario to go down. And yeah, I think I can remember one other time that I remember seeing a referee crew that was like, this referee's not allowed to do anything in the playoffs, and I can't remember when it was or exactly what happened. But we don't see a whole lot of ref man too often. So I mean, I guess it's a step in the right direction. Positives in football, though, I mean, for the Lions is that they did. They probably should have won, beaten the Cowboys at home. That's a good thing to think about heading into the playoffs. They're 6-3 away, so I mean, it sucks that they're not going to get those the home game in the playoffs. But they're 6-3 away. It could easily be 7-2 away. They've proven that they're a good road team. Dan Campbell's got them fired up, and so I mean, for the Lions here, you got a decent game from Jared Goff. Those two picks were a little rough, but nothing too horrible. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs played well. St. Brown, Laporta, and Williams all played well. Your defense played pretty well, despite some giant plays. You very quickly allowed a 92-yard touchdown to CeeDee Lamb, and you just turned that around and locked in, and didn't allow much more scoring at all for the next quarter, and really for the next two quarters. And in the fourth quarter, it slipped up again. So I think it sucks that the Lions, they don't want to hear about the positives that come out of this game. They wanted to come away with victory. But they come out 11-5, still have that 6-3 away record. They've proven that they're good on the road. They beat one of the teams who's been the hardest to beat, or almost beat one of the teams who's the hardest to beat here in the season this year, and got some pretty good performances out of everyone. The Cowboys as well. You got your passing game firing. Obviously, you won this game, so there's more positives for you to think about than the Lions. But you got your passing game going. We've seen the run game get fired up. We've seen the receiving game kind of get fired up sometimes. This passing game was mostly CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb, Cooks, and Ferguson get a little bit going. I will say for the Cowboys here, though, one thing Terrence and I talked about at the early season is that the running game was a big part of that success. And in this one, I mean, Pollard gets 49 yards, but otherwise, they don't really get much. Their next best rushing performance is a tie between CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. So, I mean, it's just with 5 yards. So, they had the air game going. They didn't really need to look to the run game as much. But I think there's honestly more negative to look at in this game for Dallas than there is for Detroit, which is unfortunate since Detroit comes away with the loss and Dallas pulls off with the victory and probably the NFC East.
Yeah, and let's be honest here. Tony Pollard, he had a few good runs late. I remember a play that he had like a first down run. And it was just when Troy Aikman was just mentioning like, hey, Tony Pollard really hasn't had a good game outside of like one run earlier. So he had a few good runs in this one. And besides that, running game just did not exist. And outside of a few, obviously Brandon Cooks got the touchdown. Jake Ferguson, he had a couple plays there. Like he always does here and there throughout the game. Brandon Cooks again 5 for 60, but like the passing game was really just CD in this entire game. He had half of Dak's completions. I mean, you take out those, and obviously you take out the number one receiver for every team, like it's going to be a drop off. But like you take out CD in this one, I mean, Dak has like 110 yards passing. I mean, it was really just CD over and over and over, and the Detroit Lions couldn't stop it. And that's pretty much what we talked about, when we did the preview in our picks last week. Obviously Dallas can't get run over. They didn't get run over. Detroit ran the ball well, but it wasn't like, not nearly what it was, with the Bills. And they did pretty well against the run last week against Miami. So not an amazing performance on run D, but obviously better than it had been in the Bills game. And for the most part this season, such as like the Cardinals game early on. With that being said, it's this win didn't do that much to impress me for the Cowboys. And honestly, the Lions, you can say they should have won. They probably should have. But, Jared Goff had a couple interceptions, and it was just the second one was really bad because that really should have ended the game. Dallas kind of just mismanaged that last drive there, to be honest with you, because that really could have been the end of it. And that's where that tripping penalty came out. So I'm not going to say I was really super impressed with either team. Like, obviously, I didn't think it was going to be a 35-32 game or anything like that. But I didn't come away incredibly impressed with the Cowboys from that standpoint. And despite having that long drive at the end of the game for the Lions, like Jared Goff for the most part wasn't super impressive in this one either. So maybe it's just how this game turned out individually. Maybe it doesn't really mean much, going forward. Obviously, the Cowboys, they got Washington this week, so you're expecting them to win that, lock up the NFC East, and probably lock up the 2 seed. The Lions, on the other hand, they'll probably win as well. So I mean, it's not really that big of a deal right now. But I will say, I think this wasn't the best game for either team in totality. So, again, it's their end of the season. It was a tight game. This determined playoff positioning. It's a possibility you see these two teams play again, depending on how things shake up with seeding. They win their first round games and they'll play each other. So it'll be back in Dallas again if the Cowboys get the East. So maybe things will turn out a little bit differently. But yeah, it wasn't, for me, it wasn't the best showing for either the Cowboys or the Lions.